Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you're enjoying your weekend so far. That was one of the most incredible playoff series that I've ever seen. I'm pretty bummed that it's over, actually, because I'm not sure we'll be able to match that in anything going forward. If we do, we are very, very lucky. Just an incredible back and forth series. Super difficult to make predictions about anything. The way that the script flipped on a day-by-day basis in the series, the road team winning the last 3 games of the series. If I'm not mistaken, the teams literally alternated wins until Game 7 of this series. You know, it's a shame that only one team could win, because in this case, I think these were 2 of the best teams in the league by far. You could argue these were the 2 best teams, and unfortunately, someone had to go home in the second round, because that's what happens when the league is this stacked with talent. I think Game 7s are super interesting. It reminds me, it captures the closest thing that you can get to that NCAA tournament type of vibe. Single elimination, incredible pressure. Even the ball just feels weird in your hands. I remember when I played in the national tournament when I was playing NAIA ball, just like the entire vibe is so different in a single elimination environment. The stress is just palpable and everything just becomes super complicated. And you see it particularly in jump shooting, in the way that both teams, even on fantastic looks, Boston shot a lot better than Milwaukee in this game, but they started terribly. and they were getting wide open shots that they weren't even close on, that were barely grazing the rim as they went flying off. We are going to break this game down in its entirety. I'm very excited to get into the weeds on everything. We're going to bring Carson on, and we're going to have some go through the 5 biggest questions from this series, look a little bit forward into the next round and some of the fallout from this series. Before we get into the weeds, I wanted to go over a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel. Make sure you stay on our channel all night long. We will be going live after Mavs Suns as well. Colin Cowherd, who's been vacationing somewhere in Europe off the grid, he will be back and he'll be reacting to both games on YouTube. Also, Draymond Green is recording his show tonight, and he'll be reacting to both games, as well as the beef, the back and forth thing going on between him and Kendrick Perkins. He'll be reacting to that as well. You guys aren't going to want to miss any of that. So stay on the Volume's YouTube channel. And last but not least, make sure you follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT, so you can see all of the video content that I do that backs up some of the things and the concepts that we talk about on the show. But I want to start with Boston's ceiling, because it's been a roller coaster familiarizing yourself with a new good team. You know, like, we know a lot about Milwaukee and who they are. We've known them intimately over the last couple years. The Drew Holiday, Giannis, and Chris Middleton pairing. We know what they're good at, what they're bad at. We're very familiar with them. You could say the same thing about the LeBron AD Lakers or the Steph Draymond Warriors, but we're learning about this Celtics team in a lot of different ways. They kind of disappeared for a while after Kemba Walker got hurt, and they started leaning on Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown to be their primary decision makers last year in the early part of this year, and it was ugly, and they were a bad team, and they were out of sight, out of mind. And then January 23rd, something clicked. I personally credit Ime Udoka. I think he baked in a certain level of toughness and resilience in that group that they did not have. And I think that, in combination with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown getting a ton of very valuable reps as primary initiators, meaning doing the job of what a point guard does, all of those reps helped develop those guys into more multifaceted and successful offensive players. That then, of course, caused them to buy in on the defensive end of the floor, which, again, a lot is Ime Udoka. And the next thing you know, we had a team that on the surface appeared to be the best team in basketball. As we've said many times on the show, not only were the Celtics the best defense overall in the regular season, but they were 5 points better than everybody in defensive rating from January 23rd to the end of the season, which is like a 35-game sample size. And then during that stretch, they were also the number 1 offense in all of basketball. Then we see them go up to Brooklyn and whoop their ass. A really good Brooklyn team that was basically an inch away from making it to the conference finals last year. And I know we all made a lot of jokes at KD's expense, not myself, but I know a lot of people were taking opportunities to jump on KD and Kyrie and everything about the Brooklyn Nets, but it was a really good Boston team that was doing that. And after that, we had to recalibrate because Boston was showing a level of defensive capability that we hadn't seen from really any team in the last 5-10 years. The closest is maybe your 2019 Raptors or your 2020 Lakers, right? There just aren't that many examples of teams that could hit a defensive ceiling nearly as good as this team that had the versatility to be able to do it in drop coverages or with switches or doubling and recovering or staying home and making you play one-on-one all night. They could do it all. But with all of the length and athleticism necessary to execute it in a way that made really, really good players struggle. But then we got into this Bucks series and they faced the champion and they faced the best player in the world, and it caused them to waver a little bit, specifically on the offensive end of the floor. And if you guys remember after game 6, I said that Boston is kind of like the Jekyll and Hyde team of this playoff run. Their best punch, their ceiling is unquestionably higher than any of the teams in this field. When you get Jayson Tatum driving and kicking to people, when you get Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown driving and kicking to people, Tatum and Marcus Smart in particular were fantastic playmakers today. When you get them clicking like that on offense with all of that talent, dribbling and shooting and passing the basketball, they're really difficult to guard. And then on defense, they're the best defense in all of basketball by a mile. So when those two things are humming, they're incredibly difficult to beat. And the question was, what were we going to see tonight? Because I knew all of those things before game 1, and they came out flat and got beat. Wouldn't even attempt a mid-range shot, had a bunch of turnovers, never ran back on defense on the turnovers, and they got beat soundly. Then they went back and beat the shit out of them in game 2. But then they roll up in Milwaukee and lay an egg. And then they come in game 4 and come back from down 10 and have this incredibly impressive win. It was like a roller coaster up and down. And so you never knew what you were going to get from this team. Then I started to kind of look at the film, and what I could tell from looking at it is it seemed to me, again, this is a new entity in the league, this Boston Celtics team. So we're all learning on the fly. And what seemed to me to be the problem, the source of their poor decision-making on offense was when Milwaukee would ditch Brook Lopez and start switching everything. Because when Brook Lopez was on the floor, they'd run this high screen and roll, right? And Brook would be in drop coverage, and guys like Tatum and Brown and Smart were getting disconnected from their defender and cleanly operating in the middle of the floor and drawing help and kicking to shooters, and they were getting fantastic shots every time. When Milwaukee would switch everything with Brook Lopez off the floor, all of a sudden, they're not getting separated from their defender. Guys are in isolation situations, and Tatum and Brown and Smart kept going to pull up jump shots off the dribble, and it was ugly offense, and it actually worked and led to a Milwaukee win in game 5, and I believe it would have worked in game 6 had it not been for Jayson Tatum getting insanely hot at the end of the game and making a bunch of shots. And if you're a Bucks fan, you have to be infuriated, because all of that data was readily available to everybody in the Bucks organization. I sent out the numbers earlier today. Brook played basically half the series before game 7. And in the half that he was on the floor, the Bucks got absolutely destroyed. They were minus 16 per 100 possessions. And in the half that he didn't play, when they primarily switched, there was some Giannis drop stuff in there, but for the most part, they switched with those lineups. They were plus 6 per 100 possessions. So a 22-point swing. And so what did I tell you guys? I said I thought that Milwaukee would finally go to a switching lineup for most of the night tonight. And I thought that Boston would struggle offensively and that the game would be a coin flip. And I said that I trusted Giannis a little bit more than I trusted Boston's defense. Well, Coach Bud played Brook Lopez for 37 minutes. 37 minutes. In the face of all of that evidence that I just laid out for you guys. And so if you're a Bucks fan, you got to be infuriated. In fact, when things were going south there in the third quarter, Bud went to 3 bigs before he benched Brook Lopez. His audible when things were going bad was to go to that Bobby Portis at small forward next to Giannis at the 4 with Brook Lopez at the center, which is like the exact opposite of what I would have done in that specific situation. It was really, really strange stuff. But to Boston's credit, you know, I've always talked about their offensive process and their shot selection. You know, there's nothing wrong with taking a wide open 3. But there's a difference between taking a quick 3 early in the possession off the dribble, or a quick 3 in transition, and a 3 when your feet are set on a kick out. And it's not just as simple as the psychology of shooting early in the clock, because that's part of it too. But I want you guys to think of it strictly as if you were the shooter, okay? If you're running up the floor full speed in transition, and you have to set your feet while you're running to knock down a shot, that's tougher than a standstill shot when you're facing the rim, right? Now, let's say you're the ball handler and you come off of a ball screen and there is a defender who gets caught on the screen and a defender in drop, and you have a little bit of space and you pull up. That also is a tougher shot. You have to handle the basketball and get into your shooting pocket. You're on the move, so you have to get your feet set. That's a tougher shot. Now, let's pretend Marcus Smart drives to the basket, gets both feet in the paint, and you are standing on the right wing, standing, facing the rim, facing Marcus Smart, and your feet are already set. And Marcus Smart kicks out to you, and you catch, and your feet are already set. You've been standing still, so you're not fatigued. It's a much, much easier shot. That's why it's not as simple as open versus not open. It's good process. You have to have good shot process. And throughout this entire game, I thought Boston's process of attacking the rim and kicking to shooters rather than settling for quick early shots in transition and out of ball screens was a huge part of why their shot quality was better. The textbook version of this tonight was Grant Williams, who was wide open all night. And some of that Game 7 stuff was happening early, right? Like I think Grant Williams started 2 for 7 from 3, and the announcers were getting on him, but they were saying like, hey, these are the open shots. And as we've talked about, this is Milwaukee's defense. Milwaukee ranked 20th in defense from the All-Star break to the end of the season. And during the entire regular season, I think they were 14th. And if you looked at their numbers, they locked down the paint and they gave up wide open 3s. They gave up more wide open 3s than any team in the NBA. They gave up more than 20 wide open 3s per game, according to NBA.com, meaning the defender is at least 6 feet away. Those are wide open 3s. And so that's what the Milwaukee defense gives up. Now, over the course of this series, Boston has neglected to generate those really high quality ones at stretches where they would take those quick shots. But when they had that process down and got into the paint and kicked out, they got great looks and they knocked them down. And here's the thing. You start 2 for 7. To Grant Williams' credit, he didn't get scared. We've talked a lot about this on the show. We were talking about it with Dylan Brooks and Klay Thompson after that Game 6 the other night. There's a lot of people that don't want to shoot in these environments. There's a lot of people that have fear. There's a lot of people that they miss a couple and they just think it's not their night and they don't want to take them. Grant just kept taking them. And after starting 2 for 7, he caught fire in the second half and made a bunch of them, and that blew the game open. But that's the game is it's one of 2 things is going to happen when you're giving your opponent wide open 3s, because Milwaukee got a lot of wide open 3s tonight too. The difference is they were 4 for 33. The difference is as the misses piled up, they seemingly got more and more discouraged, and the shots were further and further off target. Whereas with Grant Williams, he just took those as opportunities to build his rhythm. And then as the game progressed, he just started knocking them down. But it was that poor shooting from Milwaukee changed the game, because everything in basketball is connected. The more your shooters are making teams pay for helping, the less teams can help on your star. Giannis came out like the Tasmanian devil today. He had 10 points and 8 rebounds and 6 assists in the first quarter. He scored or assisted on 24 of Milwaukee's 26 first quarter points. He came out like a monster. But what did you guys notice over the course of that game? Because you didn't have to guard Pat Connaughton, because you didn't have to guard Grayson Allen, because you didn't have to guard Wesley Matthews, because none of those guys were making shots, they started helping more on Giannis. I remember I saw this phenomenon for the first time in that Suns-Lakers series last year. And everyone looks at Anthony Davis getting hurt, which obviously was a huge part of that series. But part of the issue, too, was every Laker just got outrageously cold. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope couldn't shoot. Kyle Kuzma couldn't shoot. Everybody on the Dennis Schroeder was like AWOL. Like he would pump fake at nobody out on the perimeter. And as a result, every time LeBron caught the ball on the wing and turned to face the basket, there'd be a defender right in front of him, and there'd be a defender in his left driving lane and a defender in his right driving lane. There was no option other than to shoot over the top. And that's what happened to Giannis in this game. As it progressed, even though he was phenomenal in that first quarter, the worse that Milwaukee shot, the more it manifested in Boston building a more dramatic wall, and it took away those options. Special shout out to Chris Mannix here at the Volume. He called this after Game 5. He was like, I want to see Boston put Marcus Smart on Giannis more. And they actually did that starting in Game 6, and they did it a lot again tonight. I'm not sure that it would have worked had Milwaukee shot better, not because of the bad strategy. It just, Giannis is the best basketball player alive. But I did think it was an interesting wrinkle over the course of the last couple of games because of his quickness and his ability to stay in front of Giannis and discourage some of the more physically aggressive moves, the elbows, the rip throughs, the swim moves, the Euro steps and things like that, because he's going to just flop every time. And it just discourages Giannis a little bit. But all of that piled up. That the spacing, the Marcus Smart getting up underneath him, the lack of shooting in the way that it caused the wall to become more dramatic. And then I thought fatigue played a role. Giannis tapped into something in this series that we haven't seen in a really long time from any basketball player. And it took a certain level of physical exertion that was inevitably going to take a toll on him. And I thought especially in that second half, he started to look tired. And he started to show some of that fatigue. And it started to manifest in a lack of willingness to plow through that wall. Because that's the whole thing with Giannis, is you just keep plowing through the wall. Because eventually it's going to fatigue. Eventually it's going to lead to guys getting out of your way. And that's when you have those opportunities. But, as far as Milwaukee goes, there's some serious stuff you got to look at after the season. The league is stacked right now. Chris Middleton being out is a huge deal, obviously. But there was nowhere near enough offensive talent on the floor for Milwaukee to score against this Boston defense when they were loading up on Giannis. That's something they're going to have to figure out. But some of it's game 7. And, this is the thing. And I was talking about this with some other people on Twitter during the game. But, Boston's going to make you look bad. Brooklyn actually put up a decent offensive rating in that first round. But the context there was KD and Kyrie on the floor in the regular season was giving you damn near 125 points per 100 possessions. So it was like an unbelievably dominant offense that ran into Boston's defense and became average. And what you're seeing here is an average offense. The Bucks this year without Chris Middleton averaged about 109 points per 100 possessions, which is okay, right? It would have been towards the bottom of the league, obviously. But it's the offense depends on Chris Middleton, right? But it took it from a bad to below average offense to an absolutely untenable offense that could not score in the half court. That's Boston. And we need to stop making excuses for what has been transpiring in these playoff series. It's not about KD and him not being multifaceted enough to attack Boston's defense. It's not about Kyrie and him being kind of a weirdo that probably, shouldn't be playing a team sport and should probably be in his soul. No, none of that. None of that is the case. Boston shut them down. That's what happened in that series. This is not about Chris Middleton being out. Obviously, it plays a role, but Boston's defense is really, really good. They caused Giannis, literally the best player in the world's efficiency, to tank in this series. Literally a Shaquille O'Neal 2.0 perimeter version. His shooting percentage is tanked in this series. That's Boston. And we're going to talk a little bit more here in just a minute with Carson about Boston's ceiling and whether or not they have the capability to win the title. And that gets more complicated because then we're diving back into those Boston offensive issues. But make no mistake, this Boston defense is by far the best defense in this field, arguably the best defense of this era, and that is a massive weapon looking forward in this playoffs. In these playoffs, that is a dependable thing. Milwaukee shooting wide open threes, they might go in, they might not. Tonight they didn't go in. Boston's defense is the safest bet in sports right now. Every single night, they are going to come out and make life a living hell for you. And they did it for 7 games. Credit to Milwaukee for dragging it out. Credit to Giannis for dragging it out. But Boston's really good, man. And I think we all need to be a little bit prepared for Boston potentially being around for a long time into June. All right, we're going to bring my guy Carson on, and we're going to get a little bit further into the weeds about some of the details of this series. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Jason, how we doing?
I am doing good. How are you, man?
All right, well, we're going to play a little game here. It's called Tomorrow's Takes Today, because that's what we do here at Hoops Tonight. We get out in front of it with the quick-hitting reaction stuff for you all, obviously. And I think we need to start with Giannis here, because we've talked a lot about how spectacular he was throughout this series, trying to overcome the Middleton absence and what you have called the best defense of this era. But at the end of the day, the Bucks did fall short. So does Giannis deserve any criticism for that?
Hell no. Absolutely not. Now, he didn't have a great night tonight, but I did think it was a product of all those things that I talked about. He came out absolute gangbusters, doing everything to try to steal this game in that first quarter, and nobody else on the team showed up. Literally nobody. And then, like we talked about, as the shooting started to pile up and become a problem, the wall just got more and more dramatic, and it just became impossible for Giannis at that point. Now, if there ever comes a time where Giannis can start punishing people over the top by knocking down consistent jump shots, then that's when that's when we're talking about potentially the best basketball player that's ever played the game, right? But like in this specific case, like to me, the box score numbers tonight were more a product of just the way the game unfolded. But this is my biggest pet peeve because, you know, I obviously I'm a LeBron fan, but this doesn't just apply to LeBron. This applies to all of the basketball players of this era because there is no Michael Jordan in this field. We don't have a guy that went 6-0 in the finals, even though Michael Jordan lost plenty of playoff series in his career. But yeah, how many of you guys are familiar with the 3-6 Mafia phrase that used to get thrown around all the time, referencing LeBron fans, right? And obviously 4-6 Mafia just doesn't quite have the same ring to it. But that phrase used to always bother me just simply in the sense that it was such a weird way to look at this particular sport. Don't get me wrong. Like, basketball is unique in the sense that one player can impact winning more so than any other sport that I'm aware of in terms of team sports. You know, like even if you are Clayton Kershaw, the best pitcher of this era, if you can shut the other team down in game 1 of the World Series, that's great. We're not seeing you again until game 5. You know, like if we've seen Tom Brady with a bad offensive line lose in early playoff rounds, right? Like uniquely in basketball, one player can put a stamp on the game in ways that other sports that's not the same. However, even that only goes so far. Tatum is really good. We're going to talk a little bit more about him in a little bit. But Tatum is not nearly as good as Giannis. Not in the same stratosphere. Giannis, I think, is on a tier by himself atop the league right now. And he literally there was nothing he could have done tonight to win that game. And too often, anytime any individual player loses, and this is part of that stupid stan culture that's kind of taken over with NBA fans, where it's like, no, everyone just really like kind of aligns behind one player, and then everything that they do and the way they talk about the game is to denigrate all of his rivals and to uplift his. It's like apologists for they're just all apologists basically. And not only is it bad for just the way we talk about the game of basketball, but it's really unfair to these guys. because it's just not realistic. It's not the way that this works. I thought Kevin Durant was the best basketball player in last year's playoffs. I thought he tapped into an incredible level of basketball last year in that series against the Bucks with his co-star injured with an ankle and his other co-star on a bad hamstring, and he damn near stole that series, but he lost. And I had Giannis fans calling me crazy for saying that I thought KD was the better player in that series, but he was. He played better basketball than Giannis in that series and damn near swung the outcome of a series that he had no business even being competitive in. And that's what happened here. Giannis had no business even being competitive in this series. I picked Boston in 5. They were a massive favorite before the series. There was no reason in the world why they should have even been playing this game today, except for how great Giannis is. 2018, so many parallels between that series with LeBron and the Celtics in 2018. Same thing. They're sitting in overtime of game 1 of the NBA Finals against the Golden State Warriors. They have no business being there, except for LeBron tapping into something that no basketball player in 2018 could tap into. All 3 of those guys in those specific scenarios I mentioned, I thought were the best players in the world in those seasons. And none of them got the trophy. So as much as winning is all that matters within the team concept, and I'm big on that. I don't like, I don't like diminishing winning, because winning is all that matters. But that's within the team concept. Criticizing individuals every time they don't hoist the trophy, to me, is super disingenuous. It's unfair, and it's just lowbrow, the unintelligent basketball conversation. It's just not something I'm interested in. Like Giannis, to me, is unquestionably the best basketball player in the world, and he lost in the second round this year. Here's what I don't want to hear. Us having a GOAT conversation in 20 years and someone going, remember when Giannis lost in the second round in 2022? That's weak. No, it's not. He was the best player. Like that's just something that we got to ditch in the entire way that we talk about this game.
Yeah, I totally agree with you philosophically, and we do see it very consistently. And I think to a specific debate, like after it was announced that Jokic was MVP, there was a lot of talk about, okay, but he isn't still here. And specifically Embiid advocates and stands pointed to that fact. But it really says a lot about the way that you lose. Obviously, Embiid lost in pretty humiliating fashion. Jokic lost playing basically an offensive masterpiece. And Giannis lost averaging 34, 15, and 7 against the best defense in the league. So I agree with you. I'll try to play devil's advocate a little bit. I think obviously this was a Herculean task, right? Because this team is just not equipped in terms of shot creation, like you've said. And it wasn't just Giannis. I mean, I think Drew had to take on much more significant offensive volume for a lot of this series than he probably would have wanted, because they don't have shot creators elsewhere. But it is an inefficient series from Giannis. There's probably too many of the bad jump shots, and he only shoots 25% from 3 and 46% from the field. I don't know that you could really say that he forced it, because it did feel necessary, but I know you said that he did everything, and I think that I largely agree. But is there anything that you would look at from this series and say Giannis should have done this better? And is there any part of you that resonates at all with the, well, I mean, a guy really does have to be held accountable for if his team comes up short?
Again, but here's the thing, Carson. Like, let's say that Giannis also has Kevin Durant's jump shot. Okay. So like he mixed in all these possessions is coming down and like pulling up threes off the dribble and making them.
Yeah.
First of all, now we're talking about a Monstar. Okay. We're not talking about an NBA player. We're talking about an alien. We are now building a created player in NBA 2K with the sliders all the way up, who's 7 feet tall. That's just not realistic. Okay. Like that.
Yeah.
If that guy ever exists, then I don't know what's going to happen to the game of basketball. But the second thing is, Milwaukee shot 4 for 33 from 3 tonight. And all of them were open because of Giannis. So here's the thing. Like, I think the best basketball player that I have seen live in my lifetime is 2018 LeBron. I still think MJ's the GOAT based on all of the film that I've read, all the books that I've read, and I trust people that were around during that time. But like, I didn't see him with my own eyes live. Okay. I watched LeBron James live in 2018, and that was the best basketball player that I had ever seen. I could have dropped him into this game tonight, and he's losing because his teammates are going to go 4 for 33 from three. This is a team sport. There is a dynamic. We always talk about that like cascading effect. It's like the more shots you guys make, the more things are opened up. The more they miss, the more things close down on you. What would inevitably happen if I dropped 2018 LeBron into this game is he'd be turned into a jump shooter because there'd be absolutely no driving lanes, because nothing would be open around the basket, because his teammates aren't knocking down open threes, and he might make 2 or 3 of the threes that Giannis missed and 2 or 3 of the mid-range pull-ups that Giannis missed, and they lose by 9 instead of by 15 or whatever it was. Like it's just not a realistic. It's people, and I get it. To me, where it becomes an issue is when you're looking at the Joel Embiid situation, where it's like, dude, you're playing a Miami Heat team that's not as talented as you. Like, now I have to look at the results with you. Okay, did some of your teammates not play well? Yeah, that's true. But you should have been able to overcome that. You had the talent. Last year when Embiid and the Sixers lost to the Atlanta Hawks, like, what's lame? Blaming Ben Simmons when you were playing, Trae Young and a bunch of role players, and you lost at home in a game 7. Like, that I can't look at. But like, when you're watching a game and there's a clear talent chasm, it's not real. It's not fair criticism. Like, my least favorite example of this is people will point to KD hitting a pull-up 3 over LeBron in Game 3 of the 2017 Finals as like some huge marker of him outplaying LeBron in the series, when literally that was the 15th consecutive game that Golden State team had won in the playoffs. They were undefeated in the playoffs. That's not any sort of mano-a-mano type of battle between KD and LeBron. That's the greatest basketball team ever assembled going against that Cavs team. It's a totally different vibe. And so, again, with this kind of stuff, it's just, I understand that it's part of like the take culture. And I understand that we, as a society, we love to lift people up when they win and burn them down when they lose. But sometimes it's more complicated than that. And that's all I'm saying.
I'm totally with you. And I love the nuance that you consistently bring, Jayson, because there is such a conflation of factors and like misunderstanding of correlation and causation, particularly with winning in basketball and individual players. This may be a tough question to answer because it's a bit theoretical, but I do think it's interesting. Is there, even given all that we've said, and, don't want to be black and white and binary with this ring or bust stuff, but do you think there's a threshold of titles that a guy has to have to be the greatest player ever?
This is going to sound like I'm setting the bar, but I think 4, and to be in the conversation. So that's why you're going to end up with guys like Magic, Kareem, LeBron, MJ, and obviously Bill Russell. There's a bunch of guys in that list, but the reason why I say that is because, like, let's say that in a normal NBA career, you're going to play 15 seasons or 15 to 20, right? Like, there are going to be seasons where it breaks your way, and there are going to be seasons when it doesn't. And you can kind of see both sides with any player, right? Like, I can look to LeBron and be like, man, 2015, that's really bad luck. If Kyrie doesn't get hurt, you're winning the championship in 2015. That's really bad luck, right? But I can also look at 2020 and be like, hey, some things broke your way there. Like Anthony Davis, who hasn't been able to finish a season any of the other seasons except for this one, like except for 2020, he finished the season. Simultaneously, Steph and KD were on their couches at home. Like the Clippers completely combust against the Denver Nuggets, and you end up playing like, a Miami Heat team in the finals that wasn't nearly as talented as you. Like, sometimes it breaks your way and sometimes it doesn't. And so, the way I look at it is like, there are going to be cases like the Kobe and MJ stuff. You get drafted into great situations. Now, for MJ, it didn't happen until Scottie Pippen got drafted, but he was able to play the majority of his career with another top 10 NBA player in his prime, right? Kobe, same thing, came into the league. He was able to play some of his best years alongside probably the best player in the world in Shaquille O'Neal, right? But not everybody has that luxury. The reality is, like, I've always said this, but LeBron for 7 years played with no real talent. He played with a lot of great defensive players and a couple of decent guards, but he never played with real talent in those first 7 years. I believe that the MJs and Kobes of the world would have left their teams if for 7 years they never got a Scottie Pippen or if they never got a Shaquille O'Neal, right? So the way I look at it is over the course of your career, there should be, if you are truly a great player, like on the level of the greatest players of all time, there should be 4, 5, 6 seasons where things break your way and you have an opportunity and you end up being the guy holding the trophy. But I think the expectation that MJ set in the 90s, where he just won every year he played, was unrealistic.
Yeah.
And we don't have to get into it right now, but there's some context there as well. But like, my thing is like, there's got to be a bottom threshold. Like, if you haven't won any of them, then chances are you're not as good as the guys at the top, because eventually something would go your way. You know what I mean? Like, kind of like Giannis last year, like the things breaking towards Giannis with KD's teammates getting hurt, with Phoenix, obviously through the entire playoff run, they got to deal with Anthony Davis getting hurt. They got to deal with Jamal Murray getting hurt. They got to deal with Kawhi Leonard getting hurt. They literally got breaks. Like, you're going to get breaks. And if you're going to get breaks, if you're that guy, you're going to get a trophy at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting threshold, but I like that. I like that 4 number there. So you talk about all the things that can break for you when you're trying to win a title. Obviously, one of the major things that broke against the Bucks here, and you touched on a little bit earlier, is the Chris Middleton injury and the fact that they didn't have him in this series. So again, you already dipped into this a little bit, but do you think that's an explanation for this result or kind of an excuse?
It's an explanation. However, the Bucks do need to get better. And Carson, do you remember what I said before this playoff run? I said I genuinely value last year's Bucks championship as a real championship, obviously. But I told you, I said, this one's going to be harder. And that was before the Chris injury. I just said, this one's going to be harder. There's more better teams. Like both Phoenix and Milwaukee caught some breaks along the way last year. There are no breaks this year. Everyone's like, even Golden State, it's like, oh, Ja got hurt. Okay, but here's the other version of the Grizzlies that are a royal pain in the ass. like there was no breaks for anybody this year, except for Boston obviously catching the Chris Middleton break. But they literally had to play KD and Kyrie in the first round, and their reward is the Miami Heat team that's the number 1 seed in the East that obviously doesn't have the top-end talent, but is arguably the most well-coached and the most well-organized and deepest team in this league. I think Phoenix is deeper, but they're a team that has a lot of talent. They're going to be another challenge, and if they get out of that, they're going to face either Golden State or Phoenix or Dallas in the finals. So, like, there is no breaks this year. And so from that standpoint, I used to think that LeBron and AD with good role players was enough to win a title. No, it's just not anymore. like especially with LeBron getting older. Like, these days, with how stacked the top of the league is, you need more. And so the next thing, I think that the biggest weakness in this specific Bucks roster was the off-ball guard. So not Drew. Like, obviously, we're going to talk about the front court stuff with Brook Lopez in a minute, but it was the Grayson Allen minutes. It was like, Pat Connaughton I thought was pretty good, although he struggled tonight. But like that, if you could replace a Grayson Allen with like a good 3-and-D wing, that could go a long way towards making this whole thing work. Because where Grayson was particularly hurting them was on the defensive end of the floor. He was struggling fighting through screens. He was getting lost on backdoor cuts and things like that throughout the whole series. So, to me, it's just like one more quality role player that you can put alongside as that 5th player with the trio, and with Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton, and Giannis. Like, that's what they need. It's like another good 3-and-D player.
Do you think the Bucks win this series if they had Middleton?
Before the series, I would have said no. If you remember, I said Bucks in 5. I would have picked I picked Celtics in 5, but I would have picked Celtics in 7 had Chris been healthy. But we learned a lot about Boston in this series, and one of the things we learned about is their offensive lulls, which I'm not going to get into again because we've talked about it 17 times over the last 2 weeks. But the offensive lulls are a real flaw in Boston, and I think Chris Middleton, in the way he would have helped in their half-court scoring, just in the regular season, they were about 5.5 points better per 100 possessions on offense with Chris versus without him. So even if you just manifest that as a 5.5 point increase over what they were doing in this series, even over the low half court numbers they were hitting in this series, it'd go a long way. But like first of all, it's not just people are kind of hung up on his half court creation. And don't get me wrong, his half court creation is huge. Like his ability to attack mismatches in the high post, his ability to hit pull up threes in transition, all that is massively important for what Chris brings to this team. But they didn't have anybody that could consistently knock down shots off of Giannis. And Chris could have. Chris is easily the best shooter on the team, in my opinion, in terms of like size, ability to get that quick release off over a closeout, and, just the confidence to be able to knock down big shots. I think Chris was the most important shooter on the roster, and he's off. So like with him being off, it affected a lot of spacing stuff for them as well. So yeah, like obviously it's Monday morning quarterbacking at this point, but I believe had Chris played, they would have beat the Celtics.
Yeah, I think obviously, I mean, he's among the best difficult shot makers in the league. He's a legitimately good playmaker. And last year he was like 24, 7.5, and 5 in the playoffs, I think. So it's tough to look at that and just given what he is as a release valve, as a late game shot maker, and think that wouldn't have made the difference in a series that was already so tight. I think the Bucks would have won with Middleton. And I also kind of thought coming in that when you talk about the personnel stuff, I think it's absolutely true in the context of this series, but I do wonder when you have three legitimate high-end offensive options and creators with Giannis, Middleton, and Drew, I kind of think that although, yeah, Grayson Allen, Pat Connaughton, they aren't, completely well-rounded offensive players, their pure shooting is often enough to kind of make that work. I think the problem is when you subtract one of those key creators, now you don't have the personnel elsewhere. But I thought coming in, a lot of these role guys got better. Connaughton got better. Bobby Portis got better. You added Grayson Allen, who had a really great offensive regular season. So I do think that with Middleton, they had the potential. But again, it changes the nature of guys' roles when he's not out there. And I just think that was too much to overcome. And we saw that every game.
So, what's interesting about that, though, and the reason why I still, before the series, would have picked Boston if Middleton had played, was the way that Tatum, because don't get me wrong, stopping Kevin Durant was a team effort, but Tatum did such a good job on KD in isolation. Like he had that capability of pressing on KD a little bit while also having the lateral quickness to contain his quick driving moves. And so all I could think about going into that series was, because I was factoring in on several different shows, we would ask like, oh, what if Chris Middleton comes back, right? And all I could think is Tatum's going to guard him. Like throughout this entire series, they basically guarded Giannis with Al Horford, Grant Williams, and then towards the end with Marcus Smart, right? Like Tatum was in an off-ball role, helping and things like that most of the series. Like Tatum, I think, would have done a number on Chris Middleton. That is so. Again, it's an interesting series. You have no idea what to expect, but all I know is one of the things we learned from this series was that specifically when Milwaukee would switch, Boston would go through these offensive lulls and it cost them games. And so I can't, especially knowing what we know now, I can't in my right mind say like, oh, they would have beat him with Chris too. It's like, I'm not sure about that. But again, it's hypotheticals at this point.
So as we sort of scroll through the factors here that determine this series, we got to look at coaching. And it seems that Coach Bud is kind of ever polarizing. A lot of people seem to have differing opinions on, his overall strength as a coach. Do you think the Bucks should stick with him, Jason?
I think so, because like the grass is not always greener on the other side. But I think Bud deserves a ton of criticism in this series. But Bucks fans are really hung up on the Grayson Allen thing. If you just like the fan base is always the best place to go to get a real accurate feel for what's been happening over the course of the season, because it's impossible, especially covering the whole league, to watch every single game twice, for every team. It's not possible. So you got to trust the local fans sometimes. But I disagreed with them being so hung up on Grayson Allen because again, let's say they played Javon Carter instead, who is a lesser offensive player but a better defensive player, right? Do you think that swings the series? I don't. Like, I think we're talking about really minute details at that point. I would have played Javon Carter. Why? Because I didn't think Grayson Allen was giving you anything on either end of the floor. But I don't think if Javon Carter comes in and plays a little bit better defense, I'm not sure it swings this series. The big one to me was the Brook Lopez thing. And what ends up happening with these situations is, like, because this is the Frank Vogel concept too. So, with Frank Vogel, like, you can tell they see what's happening. Like, because with Frank Vogel, it's the AD at the 4 versus AD at the 5. With Coach Budenholzer, it's Giannis at the 4 versus Giannis at the 5. Okay, everything we know about the game of basketball tells us that if you have that super versatile center, you play him at center, because that's when you have all the space to operate. It's when you're more switchable. It's when you have quicker feet to cover ground in transition and in half court defense and like help rotations and stuff. That's like that's not even up for debate anymore. That is just a simple basketball truth at this point. You play your hyper versatile center at center, not at power forward. You ditch the traditional centers unless you're eating up minutes in the regular season. And I think Coach Bud knew that in the same way that Frank Vogel knew that, but in the back recesses of their brain is like they're just like established, habits of the way that they see the game. And what'll end up happening is, like, for instance, Brook had some good moments tonight. He offensive rebounded really well, punished some mismatches inside. I think he made at least 1 3. Like, Brook played a decent game, but it was never about what Brook could or couldn't do. It's about what the Giannis at the 5 lineup can do. What the Giannis at the 5 lineup could do was more switching, stagnating Boston, and more space to operate. And it manifested in the numbers. And so what's wild to me is that knowing everything you know, seeing it on film, and seeing the numbers, guys, like half the series without Brook, plus 16 per 100 possessions, or plus 6 per 100 possessions. Half the series with Brook, minus 16 per 100 possessions, a 22-point swing. That's a pretty big sample size. I think both of them are right around 150 minutes. It's a lot of data screaming in your face to play a certain way. But what happens when people get their back against the wall? They always go back to what's familiar to them. And when things really went south tonight, instead of going smaller, he went bigger. And that, it's to his credit, and Bucks fans will tell you this, he's slowly adapted a little bit each year. But unfortunately, what ends up happening in a lot of these cases, just like the Celtics, like Tatum and Smart and Brown, they're all a lot smarter as basketball half-court offensive initiators than they used to be. But what happened when things got really hard in this series? They all just fell back into their old habits, right? And that's what happened to Bud, too. So I wouldn't get rid of him because I don't think there's a better option. But, like, Budenholzer going to 37 minutes of Brook Lopez tonight, in my opinion, cost them their one chance to win the series. You guys know, like, I looked at this game as a coin flip, and I told you I was going to lean slightly towards Milwaukee because I trusted Giannis more, but it was also because I thought they would bench Brook, and they didn't. And as soon as they didn't, it led to the highest probability that Boston would play one of their better offensive games because they'd be in drop all night. And they did. They came out and played one of their better offensive games, and it cost them. And so I don't know how you could I don't know how any Bucks fan could look anywhere other than Budenholzer for what happened tonight.
It is really interesting when coaches have such distinct identities, and it is something that is key to their undoing in a major moment, especially if they're like pretty rigid about it. People always talk about the 2018 Rockets, and their horrible drought in that game 7, missing 26 straight threes as like a condemnation of that strategy. And here it's like you have the Bucks playing Brook Lopez heavily, obviously over helping as they always do. And it lets up 22 threes, 7 Grant Williams threes, stuff that if the scheme were different, just wouldn't be possible. But I also think people can be overly binary about that again, and it's confirmation bias. But I do agree with you in that Bud made mistakes here. I still think Giannis at the 5 is just so clearly so effective. We saw it throughout so much of last year's playoffs and every time it happens. But I also agree with you in that I don't think there's necessarily a better option out there because Bud is a good NBA coach in the scheme of things. Let's flip to the Celtics
here. In general, just really quickly, unless you have a really good name in mind, then don't fire your coach. Like,
Yeah.
and stability too. Like you need to have like that year in, year out stability. It projects, it'll help
Right.
you get the right coach when the time comes if you don't fire your coach every year anyway. But yeah, I agree.
It's hilarious though, because the instinct is so often the opposite, just because people do always want to convince themselves that there's something better out there just around the corner. Let's talk about Jayson Tatum, because we had a debate just the other day on whether or not he's been the second best guy throughout these playoffs. We've talked many times about his ascent throughout the second half of this year. Has he officially proven that he is a top tier superstar?
Absolutely. I think navigating through those two series the way he did, it's undeniable at this point. And again, it is a team effort. This Boston team has a lot of talent. But to be clear, a huge portion of this Boston defense is what Jayson Tatum can do. A huge portion of what allows this Boston offense to function is what Jayson Tatum can do. I know Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year, but I actually think Jayson Tatum is the best defensive player on their roster. I think his versatility to be able to guard opposing wings, to play passing lanes, to help around the rim. I think Jayson Tatum's the best defender on the team. So he's the best defensive player and the best offensive player on the best team in basketball. And that's something that only a top tier superstar could pull off. You know, his performance in game 6 was like, we talked about it on the show, the kind of thing that when you're showing, when they make a documentary one day about Jayson Tatum, 30, 40 years from now or whatever, like that game's going to be on the reel as the first signature playoff moment of Jayson Tatum's career. Tonight, he was very under control. I put him and Marcus Smart were the two guys in particular I thought that made the concerted effort to touch the paint before kicking to shooters, which I thought was hugely important. And then also, when Boston wasn't shooting well early, Jayson Tatum made his first 4 threes. And in a game like that, kind of like with Milwaukee going 4 for 33, sometimes it just takes one guy that catches a heater and makes a few to change the psychology of those open shot opportunities. Because when you're 4 for 33, usually everyone on the floor just feels like the rim is tiny. You know what I mean? But I thought Tatum coming out and knocking down his first 4 threes did a great job of just loosening up Boston's nervousness. He played a really controlled game tonight. They're not all going to be, you're not always going to make every step back 3 and pull up 3 that you take, like he did in that fourth quarter in game 6. But you have to find ways to impact the game in other ways. He was great defensively, did a great job making plays for his teammates tonight, and made enough offensive plays to continue the offensive flow that they had. So yeah, I think it's we're going to have to, after this season, really dive into where all these guys specifically land. But I should say, when you say top tier superstar, I think the top tier is Giannis by himself. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's because everyone else got worse. I think it's because Giannis elevated over everybody. So the tier of superstars that has like the LeBron and the KD and stuff, I think Tatum is absolute. Like, I think Jayson Tatum can look LeBron or KD in the eye and be at the same level as them.
Yeah, that's remarkable, but I think it's undeniable that he's at that top tier superstar level now. He has eliminated effectively every weakness that existed within his game, and there's still some inconsistency with maybe some decision making, and he still does rely on the difficult shot making, but less than before. He's great at it, and the production, the two-way ability, the efficiency, it's just all there. I mean, he is undeniably at that level, I think. And the Celtics are undeniably at that top tier contender level, and you have been on that for a long time, an adamant believer in their ceiling and what they've been able to do. So is the Celtics season officially title or bust now?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you're Boston, Miami, Golden State, or Phoenix in particular, it's title or bust. The only teams that you should feel okay with not winning is this Dallas team, right? Because you don't necessarily have enough talent to compete. Milwaukee shouldn't be hanging their heads either, because you were a massive underdog in this series without Chris. After the Brooklyn series, I thought Boston was the number one contender, like with everyone else below them. And the main reason why was Devin Booker at the time was injured, right? So like I didn't know what that was going to do to the Western Conference situation. And Steph Curry, obviously we didn't know what to expect with his foot injury and what all could happen there. But one of the things I've learned in this series is you can't trust their offense, especially against switching defenses. This Miami matchup is going to get super interesting. Like this, I would hammer the under on every single game of this Boston-Miami series because I think both of these teams are going to switch every single screen. And Miami in particular doesn't have nearly enough isolation shot creation, I think, in order to really have an effect generate enough offense. But I also think that Miami's switching attack will stagnate Boston a lot and get them into those isolation contests. The difference was with Milwaukee, they were coming down after those switching possessions after they'd forced Tatum to miss a 15-footer. They were coming down and Giannis was just barreling everybody over and going right to the rim. Miami doesn't have that luxury. As a matter of fact, I think Boston's going to be able to get away with pretty basic single coverage against every player on that roster. And as a result of that, like I think they're going to be like, hey, if Jimmy Butler wants to pick on matchups all night long, be our guest. Like he's just not the same stratosphere player as Giannis. So that series is going to get really, really ugly, but I think Boston's going to control it. We'll end up doing a preview of that series at some point in the future that's a little bit more detailed. But the teams in the Western Conference are the teams that I would worry about beating Boston. A really smart team like a Phoenix or like a Golden State. I think I would pick Boston by a hair over both of those teams right now. But as of right now, I think they're all on the same tier. I have Phoenix, Golden State, Boston all at the same level, whereas before this series I had Boston a touch ahead of them. Their offensive shortcomings have caused me to drop them to that level. However, right now I take them by a hair. I think Boston is just barely better than those two teams in the West.
As you said, we'll go more into that Heat Celtics series later, but just sort of first thoughts, what do you think are some of the key things that Boston needs to really execute at a high level in that series, and what are a couple things that could theoretically be a problem for them?
It's the same stuff that plagued them in this Milwaukee series. So Miami's going to switch everything, and they didn't see too much of it in this series because of the fact that they played Brooks so much, obviously. But when they did, what ends up happening is you don't get those freedom of movement plays where you're coming off of a ball screen or off of a pin down where you get like an easy lane to the rim. There was a play in this game where Jaylen Brown came off of a simple pin down out of the right corner, and they didn't switch the screen. It was an off-ball screen between two guards or two wings, and Milwaukee didn't switch the screen. And so Jaylen Brown's man got caught on it. He curled around it, got all the way to the rim for, I think he got all the way around and then dropped it off to Grant Williams for a dunk or something like that, right? And I remember sitting there thinking, like, why is Milwaukee still doing this? But Miami's not going to do that. They're going to switch everything. They're going to switch all these pick and rolls. They're going to turn Boston into an isolation team. So how do you beat that isolation attack? The easiest way is you have to get dribble penetration. If you get dribble penetration and you engage help defenders, that's when you start kicking out to open shooters. If Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum do what they did in this series, Marcus Smart too, and fall for the trap, which is, okay, now we're taking step backs and fadeaways out of the post and just tough isolation jump shots. If they fall into that trap, they will go through long offensive slumps in the series. And I actually expect that to happen. My issue is I don't think Miami, even without Chris Middleton, I don't think Miami has the offensive firepower that Milwaukee had. And I think this Boston defense is going to utterly strangle Miami's offense. I do think the weird one is going to be Tuesday night because it's a quick turnaround. So if Miami gets one, I think their best chance is in game one. But like my early instinct is to pick Boston in 5.
Yeah, that's decisive, but I don't know that it's totally unreasonable. And I will say, I mean, if they can get through this, all of these challenges in front of them, it's one of the greatest single season turnarounds ever. They were 16-19. They looked broken. And I mean, it feels like deservingly a decisive favorite in the East. And I don't know if they would be my title favorite, but they're firmly in that top 3 tier, obviously, and probably in the top 2 for me with Phoenix.
Oh, so you have Phoenix just a hair above them?
I think that they're very close. I think I would have these two a smidge above Golden State, but yeah, I actually do think Phoenix might still be my number one. But it's tough. Like Phoenix could also very well lose to Dallas. Like it's the margins are very
Is
slim.
Chris Paul can Chris Paul score against this Boston defense?
100%. That is the key, I think.
You think so? Oh, you
Well,
think it's
no,
the
I'm
key?
saying
Okay.
sorry. I think that is the key question. I think I don't really know. I mean, it's tough, right? There's nothing to exploit. I mean, so much of his diet is just, okay, let me find the biggest weakness on the court and let me cook him and get to my go-tos. And there is nobody to exploit in this Boston defense. So, but I think he has to find a way, because if he doesn't, then I don't think the Suns have enough offensive firepower, and I think the Celtics win. So that's the key, I think. That's the key question.
That's super interesting. We might have to get into that a little bit more tonight. All right, guys, we're going to say goodbye to Carson for now. He will be rejoining us tonight after the final buzzer of Game 7 between the Mavs and the Suns. But speaking of which, before we get out of here for right now, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to preview that game tonight. So I think the Suns are going to win, and I may or may not have placed a wager on that. The problem here is Dallas's offense has not traveled in this series. When they are in Phoenix, they're scoring about 12 fewer points per 100 possessions. And I don't think it's necessarily as much about process, because Dallas has actually shot the ball pretty well in Phoenix. They're about 40% from three in Dallas, but they're like 37% from three in Phoenix. So it's not like they're not shooting well when they go on the road. The main thing is that Phoenix, Dallas's defense is gimmicky. They are extremely well coached. They are always in the right spot. The effort is top tier. But in terms of personnel, after Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock, it's a bunch of guys that are kind of out-kicking their own coverage in terms of their defensive capability with athleticism, right? Phoenix, it's the exact opposite. Like when they really turn the screws defensively, which they did not on the road. They're in general on the road in this series, they were an unrecognizable team, and that's a whole other issue. And we can get into that at a later date. But in Phoenix, when they really tighten the screws defensively, Dallas can't score. And the huge thing is just the overall size. He's picking on DeAndre Ayton in switches, and he's having to go to really tough step back jump shots, right? Like if Mikal Bridges is constantly pestering him from behind in these screen and rolls, like everything's just really difficult. Luka's still been really good, but his shooting percentages haven't been nearly as good as he usually is in a playoff environment. His step back three percentage has gone way down in this series after, like Carson used to tell us, he was an amazing step back 3-point shooter in the playoffs in every playoff series he played in before this one, right? So like there's a lot of things that are just a lot tougher about dealing with this Phoenix defense, and it just hasn't traveled. Their offense has not traveled down to Phoenix. Specifically, turnovers have been a huge issue too. They average 6 additional turnovers per game in Phoenix than they do in Dallas. I think just like what I said with Milwaukee, I think the key to this game tonight is how long are they willing to play Maxi Kleber? Because with Maxi Kleber on the floor, they become a true 5-out team. They really space out Phoenix, and they get great shots. When they play Dwight Powell, they're a 4-out, 1-in team. He screens and rolls to the rim, and yes, he gets a lot of lob dunks there, and yes, he's a better defensive player than Maxi Kleber. I get that, but overall, the tight space that they're operating in makes things a lot harder for Jalen Brunson, a lot harder for Luka Doncic, and a lot harder for Spencer Dinwiddie. And so, like in a game like tonight, I wouldn't be surprised if it looks a lot like Game 5. Just Phoenix really tightening the screws defensively. Dallas defending well. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we're in the middle of the third quarter and it's like 70-55. You know what I mean? Like that kind of game where Dallas just isn't able to generate high-quality shots because of how focused and locked in Phoenix's defense is. I'd like to see Dallas try some more switching, because I think one of the keys to this series or to tonight's game is to try to turn Chris Paul into a scorer and Devin Booker into a scorer, especially with Devin still being so closely removed from his hamstring injury. And Chris has just played 4 consecutive really poor offensive games. So that's their best chance, but I don't think it's likely. I think the far more likely outcome is feeding off the energy of their home crowd. Phoenix really tightens the screws defensively. It gets really tough for Dallas to score, and that's it. Obviously, just like with Giannis, you don't want to count Luka out. I think Luka's the best player on the floor tonight, comfortably, but I just don't think it'll be enough. So I'm picking Phoenix to win big. All right, guys, that is all I have for right now. We are going to be back right after the final buzzer of Dallas, Phoenix. We'll have Carson back. We're going to break it all down. Couple of quick details. I sincerely appreciate all of you guys coming to hang out today. If you could please like this video, I'd very much appreciate that. Also, subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel. Make sure you check out the channel all night long. We are going to be live right after Mavs Suns, like I said. Mr. Colin Cowherd is back from his vacation in Europe. He's going to be reacting to both games on YouTube. Also, Draymond Green is going to be reacting to both games, as well as his little beef that he's got going with Kendrick Perkins. He's going to react to that as well. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure you hang out on the Volumes YouTube channel all night tonight. And last but not least, follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you can see my video breakdowns. As always, I sincerely appreciate your guys' support. And, man, we got another game at 43 minutes, and we're going to do this whole thing over again. So I'll see you guys in a couple of hours.